What's up? Haven't been live in a while. Let's, yeah, honestly, it's not very often that my family is out of the house, leaving me in silence long enough to even do that. So, yeah, planets aligned today. How can I share this thing, huh? YouTube. Yeah, okay. I'm live. Working on TanStack router/start. Come hang out if you have nothing better to do. Yeah. That should work great. So, hey, there's one person here already viewing. Well, thank you for coming. I have been trying to work through a lot of stuff with Vinci lately. So Vinci is what TanStack Start and Solid Start are built on top of. So Vinci is a wrapper around, let's see. Vinci's a wrapper around H3 and Nitro stuff, which is, Nitro is also kind of a wrapper around Vite, but Vinci also uses Vite at the same time. So there's kind of these levels of abstraction. And then up at the top here, we have TanStack Start, which it's not an abstraction on top of it, but the router is also kind of up here. So there's this stack going down the chain. And it's interesting. There's a lot going on. Is that I want that to be like a straight line because I'm OCD. Makes sense. Yo, what's up? Somebody from Nigeria. That's crazy. So cool. Hold on, I'm going to try and sign in to chat. Why can't I chat? I am signed in. I can't chat from... That's fine. I can talk. All right, so going down the stack, there's some abstractions here. So TanStack router is going to take care of like a bulk of all the work that the user interacts with the APIs. Oh shoot, I went live the exact same time as Theo is live. Well, that's not fun. Because I would want to hang out with Theo as well. Whatever. But TanStack router is going to take care of a lot of like the public APIs, the things that you interact with when you're building an application. But Start is going to take care of things like server functions and SSR entry. And, well, it's not just SSR. It's going to take care of SSR. It's going to add support for RSCs. And it'll have, like, deployment stuff. And then the router is what handles everything down from there. So the router has all, like, the data loading and routing, obviously, URL manipulation. So what does Vinci do? So Vinci is like a pseudo router that will route calls between all of the different places that it needs to go. So it has like an SSR router. There's a client router. There are there is a server router, and there's also like a public router. So SSR is like your regular SSR server, HTTP server that you're hitting when you will visit like a URL, right? Client router. So when I talk about routers from Vinci, really what these are is they're like Vite environments, and the pseudo router is just taking requests and like, you know, passing them between these different environments that you set up, that Vinci sets up for you. So a request comes in, it'll send it to the SSR, you know, and then if there's a client, like it's just serving the client separately after, like the client bundle is not really like something that will get routed to. It's just served from like a kind of a public area, public for public files, and then server for like server functions and things like RSC. RSCs are kind of part of that. So it's like all of this server only stuff. That's what Vinci is doing, along with another like a lot of other cool things. H3 and Nitro are providing the abstractions so that you can do, you can basically deploy anywhere, right? So as long as you're using Nitro's and H3's abstractions over like network stuff and all these APIs, you can pretty much deploy anywhere. So that's really nice. So it's handling like request, response, streams, you know, like agnostic server APIs essentially. And Vite obviously is just doing all the bundling. So I guess Vite's kind of over here. Plugins, code, extraction, right? Vite is just obviously a great place just to do all this stuff. Basing everything off of Vite just makes it easier. So where I'm at today is an interesting place. Let's see if I can zoom out here and find what I was working on. So what's interesting is what happens when you write create server functions. So let's just disregard this for now. I'm actually just gonna like move all this stuff over here so we can focus on this. Let's zoom in a little bit. So when we call create server function, I want to show you what this looks like. I'll just do a new file here and just kind of show you. I'm going to smush all this together so that it's easier for you to see and get rid of that. So when you're like writing in your React application, you know, you're going to have like a route that you're exporting, you know, create file route, probably have, you know, the file like posts or something like that. And then like your route configuration, you'll have component, which is like our posts component. And then the loader is going to be this asynchronous function. And TanStack router and start are, oh, it would really help if I shared my screen. Boom. There it is. Sorry about that, everybody. Really enjoying it. I don't know what you're enjoying because I wasn't even showing anything. Thanks, Corey and Chris and iLearn. I don't often stream, so it's helpful to have people like you that can teach me how to do it. There we go. Let me go back. Let me show you what I was talking about. It's kind of this stack right here, if you can see that. That is, you know what, let's get rid of just go full screen. This is the abstraction layers going down. So what I was talking about is when you create a server function, some magical things happen. And it's because right now with TanStack Router and Start, everything is client side. So when you write a loader, if you're used to writing a loader or like get server side props in Remix or Next.js, Pages Router or something like that, loader is always server side, but that's not the case. Everything about TanStack Router and Start is client side by default. From my perspective, that just makes it much easier to focus building applications instead of trying to build everything from the perspective of the server. It doesn't mean that we can't use server things though. Okay, good. You can see it now. Great. Just want to make sure everybody can see it. So like right here, if we were to call like posts equals await, fetch posts, like this is going to happen from the client. It will also happen on the server isomorphically when we SSR. It will make that same call, go grab it, and then it'll render it. And then on the client, it will make that same request though from the client, like it'll call fetch posts, whatever it ends up calling underneath the hood, whether it's the fetch or Axios or some private API or something like that. It's going to happen from the client's perspective. So you can't put any like secret keys in here or like do, secret server side stuff that you don't want your users to see. And that's why it's necessary to have something called create, like a server function. So what we could do instead is we have this fetch post function up here that we'll just call fetch post like this. And obviously we would like to do our logic inside of here, right? But the problem with that is that create file. I wish this stuff would autocomplete so I don't have to keep staring at my terrible. We'll just return null for now. No, I don't want to save it. It's fine. So this would still execute on the client. Similar, like way back in the day, if you can remember, if you were paying any attention, maybe like a year ago, we kind of teased the idea of bling. Bling was this idea that you could use something like server $, and wrap up functions, and they would just happen on the server. This was before use server became kind of a standard, right? Became very common for like bundling and like code extraction. So obviously use server is a thing now, and it's happening inside of like a lot of bundlers are using it. React is like relying on that. And that's really great. So what's really fun is that with React, with TanStack Start, you could do this use server. I'm spacing what it's called. It's not a pragma. It's like a declaration or something like that. You can use this use server tag. Man, what the heck is that called? Somebody in chat remind me what that's called. I was just writing it in the Babel plugin. Actually, I can just go find it right from there. I'm not going to go find it. What a waste of time. Okay, so it's use server. You could use this right now, and with TanStack Start, this is just going to work, which is really cool. Let me just do @ts nocheck so we can stop getting all that crap. This will just work. So if you call fetch posts, it'll work. And this will work too if like you wanted to do like a search and it was a string. Then you could call this and you would need to, yes, I know, change language mode to TypeScript JSX. Sure. So if you wanted to do fetch posts here, you would have to pass like a search, and it could be, optional or something like that. And you would just call it with like Tanner, right? You can call it with a string. It's just like an identity thing. Use server. It's just taking your arguments and passing them through. Yeah, it's a string literal. It's a directive. That's what it is. It's called the directive. It's a directive made up of a string literal, if you're asking Babel. So that's kind of fun. Can I ask why TanStack query window refetch on focus is on by default? Well, because if people are using React Query and their users are hanging out there for a while, they go away and they do something and then they come back, you don't want to be showing stale data. So the default is there to save you. It's to go get the latest stuff from the server. It can be a little annoying during development if you're like constantly unfocusing and refocusing, but it's a really good default. Trust me, you're going to want to keep it on. Okay, so you could do this today. If you put in another one here that's just like foo, boolean, or something like that, you'll just have to call it like this. You know, this is really fun, and this is great out of the box that this can work. That this like will work with most systems that just use the use server directive. The problem with that though is that there's no way to like modify how this is working. Like, how is use server even working? Well, right now it's just magic. If somebody has a plugin and they're like, oh yeah, we support use server, we're going to do that for you. Under the hood, they're abstracting this, and it's going to turn into like some, it's going to turn into some function that's like calling fetch to some, magic endpoint, and then they're going to like be serializing or stringifying your args or something like that. Like it's going to get really weird. You basically don't know how that's going to be going across the wire. And that's fine. Most of the time, that's going to be fine for people if they're okay with just like magic that you can't customize. I don't like that. I think that's dumb. So one way that we can get in the middle of this is that we can create an abstraction. So instead of just use server, we're going to do create server function. Create server function is really cool because it makes you deal with some of the implementation details up front, but only the important ones. And then it lets you customize that logic going forward. So let me show you what that's like. If we were to try and call use server function with this async function right away, we'd get an error. And that's because the very first argument needs to be get or post. You need to tell what do you want to use to communicate with the server. Obviously, if you're already on the server, this doesn't make a whole lot of difference. So like if you're doing SSR, you're making a get or a post request is not going to be that important. But if you're on the client, it will make a big difference. Because these server functions can be called anywhere. They could be called during SSR or they could be called from the client. Get requests can be cached. Just by nature, they have some different things that that you use them. Like get requests can't have bodies, like they shouldn't have bodies. You'll be using search parameters if you want to like pass data along with a get request. There's also post is like primarily for form driven development. So you need to say which one you want right out of the gate. It's either going to be get or it's going to be post. A lot of things will just default to post. And that's great. It's good default. But I like to be able to specify. And then you can pass your function. Now, what's really cool here is that this is great to be able to have like multiple arguments, but it creates a little bit of a problem. Because if we wanted to get information about this request on the server, like what if we wanted to get like headers or something like that? What if there was some special header that we needed to use inside of here? Obviously, we could end up exposing something like H3s, like get headers that would come from like H3 or something like that. But I don't want to expose H3's internals. That seems like a really bad idea. I would just rather have everything be composable and not be super magical. So instead of allowing for unlimited arguments here, what we do is we'll just call this the payload, and it's set up to be a single. It's set up to be a single argument. Format that document. It's set up to be a single argument syntax. So create server function accepts a function that takes a single argument as the payload. And then after that, you get access to the context value. And context will be automatically built up for you. Like this will get inferred. What's really cool is that this will get inferred all the way through where you use it. So fetch post is now going to have to be called with search, Tanner, and it will have to be called with foo true. And I guess I should save this file, but it's okay. So it will only accept this parameter right here. And then context is going to give us really interesting things like CTX. We can actually get the method that this was called with. And you might think, well, I already know what it was called with. Well, this is just the default. You can actually say, I want the method to be a post. Like you can override it like one-off style and say, you know what, I want this to be a post, or I want this to be a get. Don't ask me why you would want to do that. I think it's powerful to be able to do that, and it might matter for some people. So you can definitely do it that way. So you can grab the method, like, hey, what method was this function called with? You can also grab headers. So headers will be in here, and you could actually get an authorization header out of here. You'll probably want to do this in a middleware, which is coming soon anyway. Like you could, you're going to be able to protect certain server functions with middleware just kind of out of the box, which is going to be really nice. But you could totally get, your authorization header out of here and do some really cool things with that. Lithdo says, how much would customizing the response returned work? I saw that you could return a response, but how would the return types look? That is really interesting. So what's really cool here is, let's say we're just like awaiting some new things, but if we return okay, here, yeah, now I'm remembering. So there's a JSON utility, very similar to very similar to Remix's utility, right? JSON. And you can just return kind of whatever you want. It's going to be like foo, bar, whatever. It could be as const. It could be whatever you want. But part of that is that you actually get to return headers. And I think a couple of other things. I think it's mostly just headers right now. So you can customize that way if you want to return JSON with like custom headers. Or you can just return JSON. You don't have to do anything special. So it could just be this. If you don't want to do any headers, you don't need to. So this would be like, hey, I want to manually set headers. This is, I'm returning JSON. And if you just want to return a response, like kind of this untyped, just kind of this generic response thing, you can also do that as well, and you can set status and headers and all that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use it. What's really cool is you can accept a lot of different things here. So if the payload that you want is JSON, then you can type it as JSON and you'll have to send through JSON. It will detect that this is just JSON and it will serialize it across the wire. What's really cool is you can also send requests. So I don't need to duplicate that. So if we were just expecting some kind of random request here, we could just accept a request. And now fetch post is going to expect us to send through a request as well. Or we could even accept form data, change this to a post, and now fetch post is going to expect that we call it with some type of form data as well. It's very flexible. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. There's a lot we can go into here, but the context is there. Single payload syntax with the context, I think, is very valuable. Let's just undo kind of what we did here. Right. So you can customize a lot of different things. What's really interesting is that we already have to wrap this create server function to get this syntax and all these superpowers, because just the regular use server is kind of like, okay, like we discussed, like if you just need something quick and dirty, but it is very dirty in my opinion. If we're already wrapping it in create server function though, we can just get rid of that. Create server function will guarantee that that directive is getting added regardless. So we can kind of clean up that code for you. So at the end of the day, like if you're just calling like fetch posts, you don't need any of that. You could literally just do this. That is a valid function that's only going to run on the server. It'll return the JSON of the post coming back. If you want to cast here, you can say as promise post or whatever. It will unwrap all those types and promises and everything. Questions. Let's see. Somebody says, I wonder if you've thought about doing something like TRPC, Elysia, or TanStack router for params and search params, where we write a validation first for the request and then get the values inferred in the function. For the input payloads to the server function being request formed, is that covered by Vinci's use server compiler directive magic? No, that's it's all just resting on a use server primitive. I'm handling all of that in create server function for you. So create server function, depending on whether you're in the client bundle or the server bundle, will normalize all of that for you. It wraps everything in a fetcher that normalizes the communication between SSR and server environment and client and server environment. So I handle all of that for you. The other interesting thing, so Muhammad said, hey, I wonder if you've thought about doing something like TRPC. This is nearing TRPC replacement territory because it's just inline, right? You don't have to do it. You don't have to do it somewhere else. You get types across the wire. If we were to add middleware and then add like a Zod middleware, then it would be even better. So like one way that I'm thinking is like, okay, if you wanted to do like a Zod, if you wanted to do a Zod style validator, what I would like you to be able to do is be able to do something like, I don't know, we'll just call it client Zod for now. It could be some kind of whatever function we want, right? And then inside of here, we say input, it's like this Z object, whatever. And then you pass this. So the way that this would work is like, okay, now client, like Zod is happening on the client, right? So we are validating before we leave our client that we are sending through the right inputs. And those would get passed through. Those could be inferred down into this right here. So you could say like payload. And payload would automatically come with all of these types validated. It wouldn't be validated on the server, though. If we wanted to do that, we could just move it inside and say, you know what? I want to do Zod, but I want to do it inside. God, I keep hitting save to format. I want to do Zod, but I want to do it inside my server. So like you could be like create Zod or something like that. Or we could even abstract it more like add. We could make it possible for you to add your own macros that would behave differently. So ideally, you wouldn't even need to compose. Like you could just do something like this where it was like, if we had our own macro, it could be like create server function. It could be like create Zod function or something like that. Or if TRPC gets involved, we could do like create TRPC function, which would be crazy. Yeah, anyways, let's see. To clarify, I meant if we got create server get async request and create server async, how does it distinguish the input request as a request? It distinguishes it based on what you pass in. So it like if you set it up as a request but you pass the wrong thing, you're going to get a runtime error. But you'll have TypeScript there to tell you that you shouldn't do that. So it's mostly just runtime enforced. But if we brought in like TRPC or Zod, we could actually enforce it at runtime as well and like make sure everything's safe. So it could unlock a lot of really cool macros. Like I really think it would be fun to like have macros like this. Probably want to keep server function in there somehow. Somebody said, Tanner, would it be easy to integrate React Native with TanStack Start? No, it wouldn't. I'm not targeting React Native. Sorry. You could use, you might be able to use TanStack Router with Native soon. but probably, I don't know, it's going to take some work to get that to work. Somebody already made it work somehow. I can't remember how. LG says, would create server function allow us to set REST endpoints? No, but we're also working on that too. So with Nitro, something that Nitro handles, let's move this down here. Oh, I forgot one. Bing bong, way to go. Here we go, Nitro. So what Nitro and Vinci kind of does, so there's like API. So Nitro has built-in support for like server functions, API endpoints. So we'll probably just follow what Nitro and Solid Start do, where if you want to expose REST endpoints, you can just do it that way. Usually it'll be like a folder, you create a file. It's like file-based routing in a way, and you've got handlers. It's kind of like a little routing system on its own. A little more rigid, but that's fine. And then you would just be able to call those endpoints from your code. And you know, if that's something you would want to do, we could look in, like, you'd probably end up using something like Trpc anyway. It could be interesting to set that up to be like, hey, I want to have this API. No, I'm not going to create my own JavaScript runtime. That sounds terrible. I'll let Jared Sumner do that. But like, ideally, I can't remember what I was saying. I answered a question in the middle of a thought. Oh, ideally, like if you wanted to serve up your own API, that you would be able to do that in a type-safe way, probably with like TRPC, or maybe even use something more official like Open API or like Buff.io or something like that. Litdo. Oh, I just read the fetcher implementation. It checks if instance of request or instance of form data and makes JSON payloads. Yeah, it does that. It's pretty cool. So yeah, you'll be able to use API routes. Like, I don't want to optimize for that use case just yet, because I feel like building an API is a really big product decision in and of itself. And you probably wouldn't want to build that API with something like TanStack router or like even Start. In my opinion, you would probably want to build that API with better tooling that's for that. Something like Buff.io, Open API, like these types of tools that are, or even GraphQL. If like don't use GraphQL, but if that's the way you want to go, like some first-class tool for like building and shipping public APIs, even if they're REST, and being able to ship types with them would be really cool. So that's kind of where that's going. But yeah, this is really interesting. So it'll work for data, right? That's the whole point. Is there a migration path from React location to React TanStack router, or is it better to start with a fresh router? There's a checklist. So if you go to tanstack.com, go to router, go to the docs, there is a migrate from React location page right here. And it's mostly just like this little checklist of kind of things that you need to do. But for the most part, we'll kind of tell you the differences, tell you some of the checklisty things to go over, and then it should just work. So there's not too many differences between it. There's a few differences in the way that you set your routes up, but honestly, it should hopefully be easier than what it was before. Okay, so this is great for data. Works great for data. We can return our posts at that point. And then in our post component, we can do this and say const post equals route dot use loader data. And then we can return, a bunch of fun post markup. So very, very cool stuff. Very fun. Let's go back to like what actually works today. So it would be like create server function. So this actually works. This actually works today. We would await that. If you wanted to stream those in, you could actually just take off the await, and then use like defer and await those utilities, which those actually might be going away soon as well. We will see. Ew, light mode. Yeah, sorry. Barracuda says, it feels like everyday bun is closer. Will adding TanStack method is built in? No, I doubt it. I doubt they will. Okay, so from here is really interesting. So at React Conf in Vegas, right? Ryan Florence gets up and he's like, hey, what if adding RSCs was as simple as doing this and just like taking this markup and moving it up here and just saying, you know what, we're just going to return this. And then this can just become, I don't even know if this is exactly how we did it, but something like this, right? So you just return this here. This would obviously probably work for like the new React Router version 7 they're working on. This is client-side code, so technically you could totally do this if you were just doing client-side code, like even today. But that's not the point. This wouldn't be a React server component. It would just be like just JSX that just gets revalidated every now and then. But really what you would want for server-side, like React server components, would be something like this, where you say, I want to render posts, right? And then this, we could actually keep that fetch posts, render posts. This would also be a create server function, and we could just be a get. It doesn't really matter. And then, no, format. So inside of here, you know, it could be any API endpoint that you want. I think if you add use server in the function, then you have a server component. Yes. Well, no. I mean, that would be wonderful. But see, for that to work, we would need to be doing a lot of magic behind the scenes in Loader. First of all, we would have to make it so that Loader could just understand the raw response coming back. Maybe we could actually. That's very possible that maybe we could actually do that. I will think about that more. But for now, go through this with me like this so that you can get an idea for what I'm thinking. And if you add use server in the function, you have a server component. Yeah, that would be great. You wouldn't get some of the other stuff like headers and all that. Like eventually, I feel like it's an inevitability that for a lot of stuff, you're going to end up wanting to send through more stuff like metadata about your stuff. Still doesn't have a use case for SSR stuff, but dang, if this isn't a cool time for routing plus the cool remix stuff. Oh, it's Sean. Hey, what's up, Sean? Yeah, it does get really interesting. Like React server components are something that I don't want to focus on too much, but I want them to be at least possible so that people can be iterating on them and improving them. Somewhere there will be somebody who's really passionate about server components and their use cases, and I just want them to be able to run wild and just kind of do whatever they want to do. Somebody said, I read the compiler code for a bit, create server function. I think use server doesn't get silently prepended in the async function. No, it does. If you use create server function, it totally does. We have some tests set up around that, and right now they're passing. So if you find one that isn't passing, let me know. So something like this, where we return this server function, like Loader, I want to keep things separate. Like I don't want the router to have to know too much about what's happening under the hood. Like as far as the router is concerned, I would really like it if render posts, if this was just an element. So like think of it like this, where it's like posts element, right? And then you're returning the posts element. And then when you call router data const, don't you love it how it actually auto completes using React Router and Remix code, which isn't type safe? Why would it be? They haven't cared about it. Only till the last few, only until they hired, you know what? I want to make sure I say his name right. Where is it? Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on his name? It's not, is it Peter? I'm so terrible with names. I had like an hour and a half conversation with him at ReactConf, and it was wonderful. So I have to do him justice and make sure I get his name right. Peter, it's not Peter Pistorius. No, that's Peter Pistorius. It's, what is his name? Who is working on TypeScript at Remix right now? And why am I blanking on his name? It's not Jacob. It's not him. Pedro Katori. Okay, so I had a long talk with Pedro, and man, Pedro is the person who is going to make TypeScript happen for Remix, and man, they better be grateful that they have him. I believe that he was the perfect person who had enough sway with the Remix team to actually convince them that this stuff is important. So he's going through happily, right? He's extremely talented, but he's going through the same growing pains and like difficulties of converting a router that isn't type safe into one that is. So we have been just kind of reminiscing on that pain a little bit, and so far so good. He's off to the right start. And I told him if he needs any help, he can totally talk to me about it. But I just think it's funny how still, even in projects where like I'm clearly using TanStack Router, Copilot should be auto completing with my own stuff, it still chooses to give me a bunch of like React router stuff. And man, I wish it wouldn't do that. So sorry, that was kind of a tangent. I had to make sure I could remember his name though, Pedro. Pedro. What a good guy. Use route data. If it brought back the posts element, like we should just be able to return something, like posts element like that. I don't want the router to have to understand stuff about posts element. That's really like, I don't want to have it have to understand that posts element is anything more than a React element. But there's a problem with that. Let me tell you the problem with this. And this is kind of leading up to where I am lately. So by the time we go through render posts, there's a lot that happens between returning some JSX and having it turned into something that you can render. Like, why don't we go through those things actually? So the first thing that happens is you return some JSX. Well, what does that actually mean? Returning JSX is great. It will return, like it's going to return, it returns elements, right? And that's great, but you can't serialize elements across the wire. And you're going to have like references to client components that won't work unless you're using the right stuff. So you have to use the utilities that are going to allow you to serialize that across the wire. Somebody says, let's go through this. I read the compiler code. Trying to write an example Zod validator middleware right now. Just cloned the router repo. You might have a tough time for now because the extraction is what you're going to have to get in the middle of the extraction somehow. I don't know. You might even have to write the Zod validator inside of the server function itself for now, until we can kind of figure out a better middleware system for functions. Just be aware. Nikhil's here. Tanner, how do... Oh, that's not the Nikhil I was thinking of. But hey, Nikhil, what's up? Tanner, how do I go and display a loading UI while TanStack router is fetching data? There's state that you can use to do that. If you go to the router and you go to the docs and you type in is loading, I want it from the router, is loading. So the router state has an is loading property. So this is actually interesting. So there's a status pending or idle. It means that the route is currently loading a route or the router is still transitioning to a new route. But that doesn't include background re-requests, because sometimes the router is invalidating, just like React Query is, and going and grabbing new loader data. So you'll probably want to use the is loading, which if the router is currently loading a route or waiting for a route to finish loading, that's probably what you want. So it will show those invalidations behind the scenes as well. But yeah, that's what you're going to want. Okay, so you return JSX elements. What we need to do then is we also need to, those elements could also have suspense. Yeah. Those elements could also have suspense. So if you're returning something that has suspense, it means it needs to be asynchronous. Somebody says, what's up, Sir Tanner? So now we can add some fresh page transitions easily. Yeah, probably. I think so. So anytime you're talking about suspense, you can't just deal with like these synchronous, I'm not even talking about synchronous, these transactional responses. Like it's not going to be like, hey, like create, it's not create response from, create, what is it? It's not rendered to pipe. It's not render to string that you want, because that's going to just wait for suspense, all the suspense to resolve. You're not going to stream anything. There's a reason that it's called render to like pipeable stream, right? So you have to take that render to pipeable stream, and you have to put your like JSX in it essentially, and you have to await that. And what that's going to give you back is this pipeable stream. That's wonderful. But that then that pipeable stream has to go back like in a response that, so a pipeable stream, this will wait for the very first one to start, and then it'll start streaming down if there's anything else in there, right? So we create a response with that pipeable stream. And then on the receiving end, like whether we're in, this gets interesting if we're in SSR versus client. Let's see. Yo, Tanner, I love the stuff you do. Your ecosystem is amazing. I also bought the very first NPM package. Built my first NPM package. It was really cool. It's a different take on localization. Could be cool to get your opinion. Oh, yeah. Send it, like, hit me up in Discord or something like that, and we can chat about it. So you get this response from pipeable stream, and then that's going to come back down like that. This is all happening on like on the server, right? So let's just do this. Server. So this is happening on the server, and then on the client, different stuff is happening. On the client, you're now taking that response stream. So you have like that response with the pipeable stream, and what you're doing then is you're saying create from fetch, and you're calling it with that response from pipeable stream that came through. And you also have to await that, which is interesting. And yeah, I'm using const. If anybody tells me to use let, I'm going to tell you to take it. It doesn't matter. And I like it that way. If anything, my hands are more lean and exercised than those with lazy hands who decide to write let. I don't know, I had somebody last stream I did was like, I can't believe you're using const. I was just like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. You have to weight this, and what this does is this creates an element that you can render, right? Yeah, you have to create this element. You have to await it to, and then you can finally render that element. So, ran the tests and updated the gist with the most post, and it seems like use server doesn't get prepended. Really? I mean, it has to be getting prepended because TanStack.com is working still. Or I haven't pushed my latest changes. Either way, some version of it that we're using in production currently works. The doesn't get prepended. You're looking at the snapshots coming out of it? The snapshots should have it. Snapshots generator flat append and prepend nested layout single level nested. Let's just take a look at these. Oh no, those are not. That's not what we want. That's the router generator. We want start. We want the, or no, it's not even start. It's the router Vite plugin. Source. Tests, shared, snapshots. Okay, so we have create server function with server gets it, without use server gets it as well, with a variable abstracted function currently does not get it. If anybody wants to work on something like Babel, if you're good at Babel, then yeah, you could probably try and get it to add use server here. You need to follow the function reference that is given and like see if it's a naked function and make it use server. Or better, you would need to do something like this and say, this is probably what I would do instead. You would have to do something like this. That's probably what I would do. Because then abstracted function is going to get tree shaken out. So it'll just kind of like stay in there. It will get tree shaken out of things that don't use with variable. So that's what I would do. If somebody wants to add that functionality, that would be really fantastic. But we just need to improve the resiliency of this overall. Happy to try. I haven't played with Babel that much, so yeah, Babel is interesting. Okay, so where was I? We're talking about RSCs. Oh, right. So yeah, so you on the server, you rendered a pipeable stream. You get this response pipeable stream, and then you send that over to the client. Like it doesn't matter during SSR that much. It doesn't matter if actually let me say where this works. If this was all you had to do and all we had to worry about was an element, then SSR totally checks out. It checks out on the during SSR, and then it checks out on the client. So let's not call this the server. Let's just call this RSCs, right? On RSC. It's like, okay, how do I turn things into an RSC, and then how do I get them out of an RSC, right? It's server component. So this isn't all that's entailed for server components, obviously. This isn't even server components. This is just streaming This is just streaming React, like streaming things. So let's not even talk about that. Let's just call it like streaming components, reading streamed components. Like this is what you have to do, and create from fetch is going to create this really cool thing that will like keep appending things if you keep streaming things through. This works on SSR and it works on the client now independently, but it's the hydrated client that this gets really, really scary. So what happens is, let's say we take this response pipeable stream and like let's say we create the element in the loader. So let's say we're in our loader and we like, let's see, where's note frame is note. Yeah, let's do that. Wait, no, I don't know what I'm doing. Go away. Okay, so let's just say in here that like we are returning an element and it was from like await render stuff. Okay, so if we're doing that, then what happens in the loader is it's going to take that element and it's going to store it. And when we dehydrate the loader, it's going to attempt to serialize this data. And because we're not using React 19 full server component setup, if we were to put this stuff into a prop, it would totally work. It would use React's built-in serialization. But it's just not that easy for the way that we are consuming server components and streaming. Like building a framework, it really is just building in your own opinions. So unless you're fully buying into React's like server, like going back to the server all the time for everything and coming back, the way that React kind of expects people to use this stuff is that like the base is going to be a server component root, and then you're going to be like dipping in and out of like client components, you know, and server components. But that's not the way that we're doing it, because a server component root just assumes so many crazy things about the way that your router works. Basically, your router can only work on the server, and it's not. I mean, yes, it's very difficult to get it to work isomorphically, right? So that you could use the same router on client and server if it was just server components. And I just don't like a lot of the things that comes with, like just changing your entire approach to the way you build your apps just for that. So really what I would rather do is I would like to keep building my apps like an SPA. And then what I would like to have is dip in and out of server components, right? So I would like to be able to reverse this and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to render a server component here, and then I'm just going to keep rendering client components. So I want to like dip in and out of this. You know what I mean? And that really works out well, because what you can do there is you can say, let's say route match number 1 gives you a server component. And route match number 2 doesn't give you a server component. It just renders, just renders a normal component. Server component can render outlet, which match 2 will then get rendered where this outlet is, and so on and so forth. So instead of having a single server component root for our entire application, what we're doing is we're creating a way for all of these individual matches that get matched up to be potentially be server components, right? To render server components. And what happens is these will happen in parallel. So even though they're nested inside of each other, we actually get to fire them off about like basically at the same time. So even though they're going to get nested at the end of the day, these all come together at the same time, and all of these server component, all the loaders will fire off in parallel, right? So it's honestly like loader 1 fires, loader 2 fires, and loader 3 fires, and then they all come back and they end up getting nested. So like then loader 1 will, nest inside of loader 2, and loader 3 will nest inside of loader 4, and then they all fire in parallel, but you still get to nest them inside of each other, resulting in kind of this nice little area where you get to compose them together still. And some of them might not be server components. Like this one might not be a server component, so it doesn't need to fire anything off. It just ends up rendering, some client component like that. And you still get to nest them inside of each other. This is a terrible graphic, but I'm just trying to show you like the forking mechanisms and everything that are happening. So this is the direction we're going, which means each, that is actually really interesting. So with a single component, with a single root React server component, you're basically making one request you're making one giant request to your React, to your server that is producing your React server component output. With this one, we're actually making multiple. So for every single time that we want to make a server component, whether that is in a loader or in an action or something where we're just returning JSX, we're going to be calling into that server to stream back those components. So the problem occurs when we do our SSR and we try and store this stuff. We need to hydrate the client. And believe it or not, hydration still exists. How many people are in here? 40 viewers? Everybody, I feel like this is a really interesting topic. If you want to go and retweet my, where is it? Copy link. If anybody wants to go and retweet this, I just tweeted it. I think this is a really important topic, but that's a kind ask. I don't think that's too much of an ask. I don't stream that often, so I might as well make a big deal out of it. So when you would think that by using React server components, you get away from this need to hydrate, but you really don't. Like hydration, you still have to create. For now, you still have to create the same element structure that you rendered on the server on the client, so that when you go to hydrate, it knows what to do, right? And it seems backwards that you would basically, what you need to do is you have to create this streaming component thing right here and feed it into SSR. So this feeds into SSR. Ooh, I don't want that. I want an arrow, right? So this feeds into SSR, but and it renders perfectly, sends down the HTML perfectly. But then once you start hydrating all that HTML, so let's actually split these up. So the SSR creates the HTML, right? And the HTML gets streamed down, and eventually you're going to get to hydration, right? So you produce the HTML here, but hydration happens on the client. Oops. Come on. Eek. So hydration happens on the client, and what happens here is that HTML comes through, but if we don't have all the necessary data to build the original HTML, nothing's really going to work. And so what happens is normal data usually just gets serialized and sent down in like a script tag, right? Where it's like, it's just a bunch of like data or something like that, and, and it's like window dot data equals something like that. And that is helpful for a lot of stuff, but it doesn't work for streamed stuff. So we've already created this stream. Really the best way to do it would be to take that stream and also like, let's see, put it into a script that has like, the stream data in it. And like, how do you do that? You basically have to wait for all this data, like for every single React server component coming down the line. You have to take the original data that it was giving you and put it into the client so that the client can reconstruct that. It can reconstruct that element. Really, you just need to make sure that you have that same element at the end of the day, right? But you can't serialize an element like the actual thing that is returned. Remember, you cannot serialize elements and you cannot serialize suspense and all this stuff, right? So what can you serialize? Well, when you do this, let's see, render deployable stream. I got to remember my code here. Hold on. Some of this is really fresh. So let's go back to the router, render post, start client. Okay, so on the server handler, what we're doing is if it's a valid element, we're putting render to pipeable stream. We get the pipeable stream and we're sending it through with the text X component and all that, right? And we're using the new render to pipeable stream stuff. Hang on, somebody's here and I need to get the door. All right, I'm back. So what can we send through here? Well, it's a stream. How do we recreate a stream? Well, you have to have the stream data, and you can just kind of fake the stream when you get back into things. So what is this stream data going to be? Well, ideally, it's going to be something like this, where it's like, I can't even remember what the, RSCs in, protocol. No, RSC, React RSC protocol. How React server components work. That's the first post. Let's give it a shot. Somewhere in here, there's going to be, hopefully, a screenshot of, here we go. So server component output. What exactly is your server outputting? You read JSON in a stream. You're right to be skeptical. Server stream is a simple format, JSON, blah, blah, blah. Here's the RSC output for outer server component. So it produces this kind of syntax, right? It's elements, like they're elements that have been serialized, but they have all these like interesting pointers to each other. So like this is like J0. Let's see, somewhere in here like M1. Okay, yeah, like these reference each other. M1 is like module 1, module 4. I can't remember what these stand for exactly. But they're referencing each other inside of here, which is really, really cool. This is something that we can serialize. We can totally serialize this and send it across the wire. But the problem is that by the time it gets to us in the loader, like if we go back to our loader, by the time it gets to us in our loader, it's already an element. So what the heck are we supposed to do? What the heck am I supposed to do? Like, I don't want my router to have to understand all this stuff. I just want you to be able to return elements, and things will just kind of work out, right? So post element, what is this? Is this an element that you can actually render right away? Like, I think it would be cool if we could do this. So bear with me here for a second. What if I didn't care if this was done server side during SSR, but I wanted to do it on the client? So what if we did post query and we call use query, and we say, hey, you know what? The query function is fetch posts. The key is, RSC posts. It's getting pretty wild. Here's the query function, fetch posts. What's it going to return? Well, we can kind of do this same thing here. Return post query data. No, we don't need to do any of that because it's just post query data. What if it was just renderable right out of the box? Like, am I insane for wanting to do that? I don't feel like I am, because I want this stuff to be super portable, right? Yeah, I want it to be portable. This has to, sorry, you don't even need that. Like, you could literally just return post query data, and I want it to be an element. That would be great. The serialization and stuff here, like, obviously you might even want to do this in React Query and hydrate it across the wire. So, like, getting an element back right out of the box from a React server component just seems like the right abstraction for ease of use. But it is, the more I look at it, it's the wrong abstraction for portability, because I like getting things back that are primitives, that are serializable, there's not a whole lot of magic involved. Like, if you wanted to serialize this component coming back now, like, what the heck is use query storing in the query cache? That is another great question. I don't know if TK Dodo's here. It's probably middle of the night for him. He's asleep. But, like, think about it. If this was a React Query function, like, what is it storing in its cache? Like, the element itself, that's really weird because it's not serializable at all. You couldn't cache that. You couldn't do anything with that because it would just bust. When you try and, like, bring that out of a like a persister, or you try and, like, update it in some way, it's going to be like React is going to say, hey, couldn't render here. We got some object with type element, or with that has type and props and children and stuff like that. It just won't know what to do with it. So the way that I have been potentially leaning is that instead of render posts, instead of this coming back as an element, having it come back as RSC protocol or something like that, right? This is where it's going to start getting a little hypothetical. But if it comes back with RSC protocol, then what this is this is a post RSC. This is a post React server component, but it's not a component. It's like React server component text, or it's like posts RSC, it's not a component. It's just like React server text or something like that. It's just that raw output. Yeah, it seems right and wrong at the first time. Yeah, exactly. And that's because React is, bless their hearts. I love the React core team. They're designing things as if it's going to be this really, really happy path of, like, if you just use it just so and perfectly, all your dreams are going to come true and everything's going to work out. But the wild is way, way more messy than that. You can store the serialized post and render it on the client, but I've tried it and it's complicated to do so because mainly of client references. Yeah, but that's the whole point of RSC, right? Is it has references to the client components and knows how to load them, knows how to bring them in using suspense and all this cool stuff. So what if it was just the text, and we return just the text, and then, we're getting this, and yeah, it would be really cool if we could use query, but if it's just text, so what do we do at that point? Like, I think it'd be really cool to say, okay, you know what if we just had like a render RSC function. It's like, hey, I got this thing back. I know that it's a React server component. If you're building something from a client perspective most of the time, and you're dipping into the server, like these are very specific things. Somebody said, however, what I did was rendering the RSC in the app code, so it might be easier if you allow doing so on the framework level. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at here. If there was some utility, some component, some whatever, that you would just kind of say, hey, you know what? This is a React server component. That's really low. It's low maintenance, and it would be low buy-in. Like it's just a utility, and it's a sane utility at that, right? It's like, hey, I got back this React server component, and I want to render it. And you just say render to RSC, right? And that would work for both now. Because like say we did this and it's still the same thing. It's render RSC, right? But now the difference is that React query can cache it. And TanStack router can cache it. And not only can we cache it, we can serialize it and persist it across the wire and across disk and all that. Like that's really cool. And it could also get potentially streamed in, right? So render RSC maybe it has use under the hood or something, or maybe it's a component. In fact, that's probably more realistic. Something like this. And that doesn't look as good or look as cool. We're just brainstorming here. Yeah. I can't use the use query hook in the router level. Yeah, this isn't. I don't want this to become a support session. So you should ask in the Discord if you want to ask a question like that. There's a router Discord. Like you just go to tanstack.com, click on the Discord link, and boom, you're in. Fredel says, Next doesn't expose a render RSC function. I would have used it for caching some server components that can be heavy to render. Yes. I totally agree. I just think dealing in primitives is really nice unless those primitives are scary or foot guns or a lot of different things. Like the reason that use query exists, it's like it's taking all of the mind power that it takes to use effect and state and all this stuff and context and so much work, and it's just turning it into this really, really simple thing that you don't have to worry about anymore. So whatever the thing is that you're going to call and use should make it so that the things that matter are the things you're passing in, and the rest of it is really just stuff that you're never going to have to worry about. Use query, everything inside of there, super complex, crazy, but you're never going to have to worry about it. Never. Really. And that would be the same thing that I want here. Like just returning an element, that's too much of an abstraction, for us to try and figure, like, what if use query was just this? Oh yeah, it looks easier. It looks better. It looks simpler, but it's not allowing you to manipulate it the ways that you need to. So I feel like something like rendered RSC would be a cool utility. Let's see, we have some chatter now. As I understand, even though we send HTML to the client, React will still have to hydrate it. Yes, it does. And it's not just React, but like a lot of different, like everybody has to do this. Well, except for Some components don't have to. Quick doesn't. But they have like really, they don't have hydration. They have resumability, which is like ultra fine grained hydration in a way. Somebody says RSC just sends references through the wire. Yep, true. If so, what is the point of streaming then, other than delayed hydration? Seems like it's just serializing, deserializing JSON. Streaming, and what is the point of streaming other than delayed hydration? I mean, it's the ability to get markup to the user as fast as possible, and then slowly bring in the interactive bits as you need them later. So that's really the biggest purpose, is just like to not have to wait on everything to resolve before you can show some HTML to the user. But streaming also enables some other things too, where like you can pretty much flush almost all of your application down to the user and hydrate it, but then you can keep streaming data in later, like that you could have some spinners and like render in things that came from the server later. So it is very pivotal to like the React server component architecture and being able to do everything from the server, which I'm not totally interested in, as you have seen, but I'm interested in doing a lot of it. So render RSC. So I want to talk through this some more. So like, what if what we're talking about, like create server function, what does it do? So let me walk you through some of this. When you create a server function, we take the method, the payload, the headers, and the function, right? I guess we take the method, the function, and the payload and the headers, every single time you call it, right? And we create a request. Now, this is all happening within create server function, which is it also is a fetcher, and it has some client and SSR aspects to it as well. So we create the request, and then if we're on the client, we're sending that back to our server handler via fetch. So it wraps all that up into a request, and it sends it as a fetch up to our handler. And this is where we then we find the extracted function that we extracted. We send it through with the payload and the context and everything that we got from the request. And then on the way out, see, 2 days ago, this was just response. Because I was being naive, and I was like, yeah, it's just always going to be a response. It'll always just be kind of like transactional, not streamed. No. React server components require that things are going, like, it has to be a streamable response. And it's just a response, but it has some headers, it had some information with it. It's like, hey, this is a React server component that we're returning, or this is JSON, or this is a response, or this is some special type of data coming back, right? And we'll just focus on the client for now. This comes back to the client, and it hasn't happened. I haven't done all of this yet, but on the client runtime, if we're in the browser, it just is going to get a readable stream inside of the response. And so we can just call create from fetch on that comes back. Like if we detect that it's an RSC, then we can call create from fetch and just use it. And from that, we'll get a readable stream or JSON, depending on like if it's a readable stream, it could be readable stream or just we'll normalize it. So if it's a readable stream, but we know that we're sending back JSON or like non-RSC, something non-streamed, then we'll just like await it, turn it into JSON for you, and then you'll get it back as JSON. If it comes back, it's like, hey, this is a readable stream and it's an RSC, so just leave it alone. You'll get a readable stream coming out of it as well, and that way. But this is where the opinions are going to happen, right? If we want to get back, you can't just get back the text, because it's not just text. like this streamed data. Well, so hydration, it is just text. So when we're when we're serializing, it is just going to be text, something like that. It's going to be like S1, boom, and all this other stuff. It is just text, and we'll have all of it when we serialize it over. But on the client, it's not. It can't just be the text because it could be currently streaming in, and we need to be aware of that. So if it does come back as a readable stream, we have to kind of keep it as a readable stream because that's what we're going to have to eventually, that's what we're going to have to eventually call. Like we can't call create from fetch with like text. Can we? I don't think you can. Create from fetch. There's not going to be any documentation on create from fetch, obviously. I wonder what Vercel has. Literally, it's not on the page. Why did it come up? Kent talked about create from fetch. I've read a bunch of stuff, but I'd really love to have some API docs on for some stuff. When was that? It's in February? Do we still not have docs on these yet? Seems like something that I want. Okay, so create from fetch. I'm assuming like you have to give it a response. Let's see, you got some comments here. Somebody said, can I modify server context currently and pass some custom values to it? Yeah, probably. We'll make that possible. I tried to make an implementation of render RSC not long ago. Let's see. You can't. Create from fetch is for server actions, right? No, it's not from server actions. Yeah, there's a couple of them. There's create from fetch. There's create from readable stream, and then there's also create from node stream, which is for like for actual readables. And this is for readable stream, which is web. This is for node. This is for response web. So I don't know if it's like graceful, if you can give it some other stuff, but I'm assuming that you can't just create from fetch text. Even if it was that, I'm pretty sure we'd have to like create some, let's just do from readable stream. We would have to do some readable, and we'd have to instantiate it and do like, constructor start, and we have to like feed the text into the readable immediately. So let's just, why is this so far over here? Let's move this back over. Okay, so let's just assume that we're going to have to call whatever gets to loader needs to be cacheable and serializable. Man, this is a really difficult problem because, okay, so let's create a matrix here. So what we have is we have different stages. Okay, so we have render, like the render stage, which needs to have an element. We need to have like the static stage that needs to have basically text, right? And then we have the streaming stage, which needs to be a It needs to be a response or like, you know, like a readable. And then I guess the stage before that is like we have an element. But this is the element. And what is this? This is like the output. This is like the raw. And then streaming, response, readable. Static is the text, renders the element. So like we need to match these up with like where we're going to use them. Somebody said create from readable also needs a client manifest and SSR manifest to work with client components. SSR manifest is used for. Sorry, most for injecting scripts. Yes. Yep. Yeah. If we do create from any of these, like they're going to need manifests to point to client components. Yeah. And during SSR, we're going to need that as well. I'm just leaving that out for now. Sorry, I'm just looking at this. Interesting. So where I got was, so my little tweet that I made, copy link. I said, hey, do we still not have docs on these yet? You can just make your own. Yeah. I mean, I know I can do that. That's not really helpful at all, but thank you, I guess. And then Kent. Why is Kent's not showing up? Kent replied as well. Oh, there it is. If it helps, React Server Components, Epic Web. So I mean, like, yes, Kent, that does help a lot more than just you can make your own. Hello, my name is Peter, the product manager. I'm here to help you get oriented. Okay. React framework. Oh yeah, this is Kent's building this for Epic Web. That's right. What are server components? Yeah. Oh, cool. It's talking about a lot of the same things that we're talking about here. Render pending UI. Blah, 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 blah. Yep. Client components. Yeah, I don't really have time to dig into this too much. But I guess client components would be where it is, right? Create from, here we go. Create from, yeah, it can be a promise as well. Is that the only create from fetch that we have? Because client is responsible for loading the module for us, we need to tell the base URL to load modules from an option called base module base URL. I wonder if any of this is indexed. Like if I go site, oh, no. Create from readable, create from fetch. Ooh. Let's see. Create from fetch. Server stream serialized browser renders streamed UI with React on server client create from fetch. Browser request client component code. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Server stream browser. Let's see. Browser request JSX payload. Server generates serialized stream serialized JSX streamed UI. Okay. So there's a lot of create from fetch here. I didn't see any like specific code. We were just in client components. So, what is this? Create. That's the same thing. Server components. We haven't been here yet. Create from fetch. Takes care of converting this format into React elements that can be rendered. It's not something you want to write by hand. Instead, use the React server DOM ESM servers rendered by stream function generators for you. Then on the client side, yeah. Create server from fetch. Yeah, you do have to await it. Response promise. Okay. So I'm pretty sure it just takes a promise or a response promise because you have to await it anyway. So why not? You can send it a promise. Well, thank you, Kent, for sending that. That is more than anyone else has ever produced on server component, those APIs. So that is extremely helpful. I actually want to say thank you. Thanks, Kent. Let's see. Isn't it crazy that Next.js uses this in prod for more than a year and we still don't have anything documented? Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Okay, so how are we gonna do this then? So I want things to like what can we cache? Let's put what we can cache. Like I can cache this. That's cacheable. And let's put what's renderable in yellow. Like that's renderable technically. And what's not serializable in red. So like we have to cache before we can render. So what we but it can't be static because it could be a stream. So like you want to be able to, so let me give you a good example. What if render posts had a bunch of suspense stuff in it, right? You wouldn't just want the text because you would have to wait for everything to resolve before you would have to wait for everything to resolve. That just doesn't make sense. Then you wouldn't be able to use suspense or keep streaming from that response. So it can't be text yet. It needs to be a readable. It needs to be a readable. Oh man, I really wish I had Dominic on here so we could talk through this. This is gonna get really interesting. I don't want to spend too much time here, but essentially, like you need to be able to just render this readable, because this readable coming through, that is what's going to. Hold on a second. What if we dual purposed this? What if we had something like this where what we have is we want something that's renderable, like what we want is this right here, but what we have is the response readable. So what if we could do this? What if we could say create from fetch, or sorry, it'd be create from readable, and you pass it the readable, but on the other end, it would produce something like this. Like create from readable is going to create an element, right? And that element you can just render. That's super cool. But what if we wanted to save it? What if we wanted to serialize it? So if it's suspense, if it's using suspense, then it's kind of going to be like a ... here. More stuff is going to come out of this as time goes on, and more stuff's going to get streamed into it, kind of like a bucket. But by the end of that suspense, by the time that suspense has finished, by the time that suspense is finished, we're going to have a bucket that is full, right? So what if it was something like this? What if this element is going to be equal to some, like, it's going to be some type, div or something like that. And it's going to have props and whatnot. So it's just a regular JavaScript object. And what we need is something on it that is synchronously accessible that we can serialize. And then all we would need to do is teach. We would need to teach things like query and teach things like router that it can serialize these elements. So when it finds an element, how to serialize it. But we know that just finding an element to serialize isn't enough. Because we can't recreate that same create from readable with this stuff. What we need is the original RSC stuff. So what if on top of this we did like element raw. Okay, and then every single time that this readable is coming through, like we're doing some pipe function thing, this isn't how you do it, but essentially, like at the end of the day, we would get a chunk, and then we're just doing like element.raw, like plus equals like chunk to string. Like this is happening somewhere. As create from readable is working, it is doing exactly this. And it's like, okay, as chunks come through, it's like resolving things and doing, making promises and triggering suspense and all that. So we could do the same thing, but we could just store the original result on element.raw. And so we would need to do this. It's almost like when it comes out, we want something that we can render. So right here in our code, when we call render posts, this is just going to be the posts element. But then under the hood, it's going to be serializable. We're going to teach the router and query that when it goes to serialize, or we'll just make it abstractable. So you pass in a function. So, we'll supply one, but it'll be like router dot, it'll be like we can already do some serializer stuff in here, but we'll have it look for this special raw, it's like, hey, is this a valid React element? And if it is, then we'll look for raw. And if it's not, then we know that we can't serialize it and we shouldn't. So let's not. So let's look for the raw, and that's going to have like all of our special, S2, blah, 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 blah stuff in there. I don't know what it is. It's like div 4 or something. I don't know. So, and if we try and render this, like having raw on there isn't going to cause any problems with React. Like React will just render it like normal. But we need to dual purpose. Like we need a dual purpose thing that's going to allow us to both cache something but send it through so that it can be consumed as a stream. And an element is basically as good as a stream. So there's questions of whether we would want this to come back as like maybe instead of a posts element, which is really cool because it's immediately renderable. It could be like posts readable, you know. And then down here we render RSC here. That's not very fun though, because then we haven't awaited the create from fetch yet until somewhere inside here. And that means we're doing asynchronous work inside of the component, which I don't want to do. I don't want to force people to have to do. So instead of teaching the readable to be serializable, we'll teach the element to be serializable. And that way, when we call fetch posts here, post query, like fetch posts, render posts. Render post is going to come back, and this post data is just going to be renderable. Whoops. It'll be renderable right off the gate. And that way we wouldn't even need this utility. We could just do post element, post query data. Like you wouldn't need anything at all. Oh. There's 22 people here still. What are your thoughts? Like you're the first people that have seen this thought process from me. I want to hear what you think. Like, is this insane? Is it scary? Is it the right kind of magic? Too much magic? Do you not understand enough to make a call either way? Yeah, any kind of like helpful feedback. Or if you don't have any feedback at all, then just say, I don't have anything to say. But I feel like this would be really nice. Like a lot of it comes down to like, it's so usable. All of this stuff is so usable when you're just rendering. But when you're going across the wire, elements and readable streams and all this stuff, they're not very helpful. So I'm just admiring. Yeah. Don't admire this stuff. This is kind of garbage. So this is interesting. So what happens after that? So let's assume that we teach the router somehow a way, like that we somehow teach the router a way to serialize this. So eventually what happens is we're rendering the match somewhere, and inside of the match we have like a suspense. Well, it's really like the match success route. So when the match is successful, then we're going to have some loader data inside here. And what we have is this script once script. And inside of here we have children that we can do some tricky stuff with. And children could just be like JavaScript. So inside of here we have like, you know, window RSC. It's like window TSR matches whatever the match index is, and then there's I have nothing to say. I'll take it. It's probably the right kind of magic to not have to opt into the async component stuff, but don't have enough experience in it to make a call either way. It's probably not the right kind of magic. It's probably the right kind of magic to not have to opt into the async component stuff. I agree. So when it happens like this, it's like window.tsr.matches one, it would be like RSC ID, or it's not even RSC. It's like loader. It's like extract. It's like loader data promises, or loader data objects, and then there's like an object ID, and then inside of here, you know, we have it's like type is an element, or it's not even an element, like we'll say like it's an RSC element. And this is all just pseudocode. And then the value would be like the raw value that we get back, you know, S2, whatever, div, blah, blah, blah. And that sets it inside of there. And then when we come back through, we have to do something with this. So it's on hydration. So somewhere along the line, this right here, this is, let's see, dehydrated streaming to the client. And then this right here is the hydration. And this is where somewhere in here, we're going to have an opportunity. It needs to be, well, it doesn't need to be async. I know it does, because we have the RSC element, like we have the raw data. So it has to be in like an async context, but somewhere along the line, we're going to need to do this. We'll have to like grab the object ID value, which is the raw data. We'll have to make a new readable. This is not how you do that, but we'll just call it that for now. And then we'll have to do and then we will need to do like router.loader.state.matches, and then, you know, the match index, loader data, and then we'll have to do like some path magic. I already have some of this written actually, where it'll actually be like set deep, and then we'll give it the path, like right here will be like the path will be like, oh, it was, you know, loader data path. It's the path like inside of the loader data. And then we'll give it the path, and then we'll give it the element. And we'll probably want to do the same thing that we did up here, where it's like await cacheable readable, something like that. So it's a lot. So we'll be like, okay, cacheable readable. We'll give it the way that we want to get the readable out of it. Or maybe we just supply our own create from readable. Maybe that's the way to do it. I hate doing stuff like that though. But it would be like start.create from readable, and then it just gives us kind of all of this fancy stuff for free. Hold on a second. I don't know how I feel about this abstraction. We can come back and visit that another time, but we'll just kind of have to see trade-offs. But it feels cool. Like it's like, okay, I'm going to create a readable, but then, and you wouldn't even need to call this. Like that's the whole point is, and maybe that's the whole point is that if it's not something that you have to worry about calling, then it doesn't matter. Because like when you render posts, as long as you do it through a create server function, we will handle that for you. It comes back and we'll be like, oh, this is a React server component. We're gonna make it so that you can cache this thing inside of Start and TanStack query. Like that's pretty cool. React query could honestly ship its own utility if we wanted. It could be like, it would be like, how would that work? So let's say we weren't inside of Start, but we were doing something like this. Format. So we could say const posts. No, in fact, what you could do is you could just say return, and then it's like, whatever the React query export is, it'd be like React query dot, be a utility like from readable. Or we could say, just create from readable. Like, that would be insane. Because then any function that returned an RSC stream, we could cache in React query. That would be so cool. And then there would have some like companion. Have to be some companion things for when you want to bring it out. So, when you resuscitate that from the cache, you would need a deserializer that would be able to create. It would be like create from raw or something like that, right? And it would create the element back from like the raw stuff that you pulled out of it. That'd be pretty sweet. I don't understand some of the primitives you're talking about. Like, what is readable? Sorry for the stupid question. It's not stupid. Readable. So we're talking about streams. Streams are these primitives that say that data can continuously pass through them and be piped around to different places. So a stream is kind of like it's a constant flow of data. It has a start and it has an end, but in between that start and end, data can freely flow through it in chunks. That's kind of just a really generic explanation of streams. So that could be really cool. I've got to run this by TK and see what he says. I bet Dominic has some good ideas about how that could work. But yeah, if we just did that for you in TanStack Router, that would be amazing, because then you wouldn't need to do that. It's just like, hey, anything coming through React Server function is going to get this kind of magical stuff going on here. And we'll cache it and resuscitate it for you and hydrate it across the wire for you. You don't have to worry about any of that. And then you can just post element. And that means that it could be as simple as this, where we just say render post component. And really, if all we were doing, like, you could just do this. I don't know if that would produce a circular type reference. But like, you wouldn't even need to use route. You could just say use route data. It's actually use loader data. There's remix again. So you could just do something like that. Or heck, we could even try and detect that if you pass in if you don't pass in a component or something like that, we'll just render what you give us in the loader if it comes back as JSX. Like, that's not a bad idea either. So it could literally be as simple as that. And if you didn't want to like extract it out, you could just do this and say the loader is create server function, get fetch the posts and return some JSX. So that would really be a great experience right there. And technically, if you didn't want to reuse this function, you could just do this And then it's like, let's see, dot then res JSON. So there you go. Like we kind of like unraveled it a bunch and then wrapped it back up to what it could be. So yeah, because create server function, it's just going to return a loader. Loader is just a function that's going to run, and whatever it returns is going to get shoved into loader data on the match. So yeah, we could totally do that. Yeah, it looks crazy. So now that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, totally. Since you mentioned query, is something like that needs to be implemented in query? If so, expecting third-party libs to conform to a new modified approach sounds a bit difficult. No, I totally agree. But that's just how frameworks already are. Like, name any other tool that supports hydrating and serializing React server component streams across the wire. The only projects that exist in are frameworks. And all I'm proposing is that we have some little tiny utilities that make that a no-brainer, simple thing to do inside of the TanStack ecosystem. Every other framework, they're already doing their own version of it anyway. Like, that's why we had to write our own adapter for React Query to get data through Next.js and down to the client, like to get it to hydrate correctly. So it's already a problem. All I'm saying is if it's going to be a problem, I'd rather have it be a problem that is highly abstracted and can be duplicated, and just the same thought process could be used across different frameworks. There's still mind share in having APIs that are mostly similar, right? So I'm going to be curious to see how Redwood is doing it and Remix. But eventually, either you have to embrace React's serialization patterns with full server component as the root and use their serializer, or you're implementing your own somehow. Even Next.js has their own like serialization techniques to get things down to the client. Like they're doing the same thing here. For their RSCs that are coming through, they're capturing the stream, they're writing the stream bytes into the existing stream that's going down to the client. When those bytes are resolved on the client, they're grabbing that data and recreating the stream on the client and then creating the fetch on the client so that they can hydrate. You have to do that. Nobody can get away from that. So, this is just stuff that you can't get away from. You have to either hide it. You have to hide it somehow, like behind a bunch of magic built into your framework, or you have to expose it with utilities and make people think about it. This is something where normally I'd be like, yes, let's abstract it and make it super invisible. But in this scenario, I don't think that's what I would do. I think, I meant going outside of the TanStack ecosystem since you were going for the SPA, but the server-side approach. But yeah, I get what you mean. You kind of need to go all in. Yeah, it's true. For this scenario, I don't think it's a big push for people. And honestly, it would still land on library authors, which is better than landing on the heads of users, because it would not be that hard. Like, think about it. The only place that we would have to add this would be an optional secondary package or utility shipped out from the React query, from the query monorepo packages, that is a utility to consume and cache and resuscitate React server component payloads through React Query natively. That's pretty crazy. I mean, we could expose the utilities, or we could even expose versions. We could write in some in the core package of query, we could create some inversion of control points. And then when you create your query client, all you have to do is say, hey, here's a custom serializer for readables coming through. And then React Query just like can turn them into, would just know how to turn them into these cacheable, renderable things. So that's looking down the road quite a ways. We don't need to look down that far for now. But if we were to get a lot of that nailed down, like this is what I wanted to get back to, is like how simple could we make it, you know? And this is about as simple as it gets. Another interesting way to look at this too would, you could potentially have this just be part of your UI. You could come back to having a component, and come back just having that posts element be there. Posts element would have to await this create server function. We would just call it right in line, right there. Something like that. And then you could actually have like some other kind of metadata, which is like fetch meta or something like that. Because you might stream in some of this stuff, you know? And if you stream in some of that, like even though it's awaited here, it might come back, but then keep streaming in data, but you might want some meta right here. So you could actually get the meta and use it in something like loader data meta. You know, like you could grab the title. Even though like post element, it will await as well, but it could start streaming in. It could take a little bit to stream in. If you knew a faster way to get the metadata than actually waiting for the first initial chunk of the server function to come through, you could totally do that. So you would have to add this as well. Component, post component. Yeah. So I think it's pretty portable. I think it would totally work. And I'm glad, because I didn't know how this was going to end up when I started this stream. But talking it through with you guys has helped me think a little bit better about it. It's all about that dual-pronged approach of being able to both create a consumable element that could also potentially be cached. I think that's the real, let's call this the RSC payload. If we have it, like if we find an element with an RSC payload, we know exactly what to do. It's all static. It's all straightforward. And then we'll have some, there'll be some hydration logic here. So this up here, this is dehydration and hydration. Something like that. Very cool. Yeah, this was kind of, I guess we didn't really finish this. I worked on this a little bit, but it's kind of fun to roll through this. So when you call create server function, what happens is it creates this request. If you're on the client, it does a fetch. If you're on the server, it just creates this fake HTTP event through H3 and Vinci. And then those get sent to the extracted payload, comes back a streamed response. If it comes back on the client, it's already going to be a readable stream, which will then normalize to either a readable stream or JSON, depending on the type of data that was being sent back. Because I do want create server function just to be callable and awaitable for JSON as well. Like if you send back JSON, you should be able to call await whatever and get JSON. But then if you call await or create server function return JSX, you're going to get a readable stream. That's it. But if that happens on the server, what happens is it comes back and we have to convert. We have to convert between a readable to a readable stream, so that we're just using like one API here, like we're just outputting readable stream. I still have to look into that because we may be forced to use create from node stream on the server if we can't get a hold of like a polyfilled version of readable, like create from readable. So maybe, I don't know. Maybe this is like readable stream or readable. And then there's like kind of a little extra step inside of create server function where we do that. So like in the server runtime, this is where we kind of do some of that. This is the server function that we're creating. We're doing some header magic. We are creating that fake request that's going to be sent out over H3, like just handling the HTTP event through Vinci. And then we wait for the initial promise. And what we're going to get back is an async stream. So that async stream is going to have headers on it. It's going to have, this is where it is right here. So if it's JSON, then we're just going to send through that readable. We're going to wait for everything to finish streaming on the server before we send that back to before we try and consume it. This could happen on this, on the server. We're going to wait for everything to happen before we try and consume it, so it can just be turned into JSON. But if it's not, then we're going to pass down this like async readable thing. And this is all inside of Fetcher. Fetcher is this isomorphic, it's this isomorphic wrapper around both client. I think I showed it right here. This white boundary is the Fetcher. And these purple and red boxes are the server and client runtimes respectively. So in the Fetcher, what we're doing is we're always looking at how do we manage what type of request we're sending? How do we manage the headers? How do we construct the correct request to go out from the client or the server? And then we call on our handler. And then whatever we get back from our handler, we kind of need to do the same things, whether we're in the server or the client. And so if it's an RSC, then this is where we might split and say on the server, we are going to return the async readable that we got back. If we're on the client, we can just return the response because the response will be a super, it'll be a super set of readable stream. And if it's JSON, then we're actually going to await the text, try and parse it out. And then like we detect redirects and things right here too. We're going to have to detect redirects in a couple of other places as well, based on if it throws or not. But yeah, that's about it. And then we just, if it's not a custom fetcher, this is where we're just doing like the serialized stuff for just use server without create server function. Because the fetcher gets used if you just use server as well, instead of just create server function. And then handle response errors. Yeah, that's it. So on the client, when you create a server function, we take the function, all we're doing is just wrapping it with fetch, essentially. That's it. On the server, we're taking that function and we're wrapping it with some specific stuff to handle the server environment. But at the end of the day, we're still just returning like a proxy function. And then this is the server handler where all of the server stuff happens. So this is where we look for the actual server function. I don't like action. I'm going to rename that symbol to server function. Hold on a second. My family might have just arrived home. We will see. Oh, nope. We still have time. I'm going to rename that to server function. Because that's what we're trying to get. We're trying to get the server function, and then we need to figure out the arguments. So depending on if we were sending through just a naked payload with args, or form data, or a request with like JSON or something like that, then we extract out kind of the different types of args that we can pass. And then we execute our server function with those args. So like here, if it's a payload, they don't get access to... Oh, if it's a payload, then... What is payload? If it's a get... Search payload. Oh yeah. If it's a payload, then we're just returning the JSON. If it's form data, then we're actually getting the form data off the request. Every single one of these is basically going to have method and request on it. If it's a request, we just pass it through as is. Otherwise, we are just... This is for args. Otherwise, we're just grabbing the arguments as is. Lithdo says, oh, random question. If a custom error, class validation error, extends error gets thrown in a server function, is it catchable on the client? Would be useful, i.e. for form validation errors. Let's see. If a custom error, validation error, extends error gets thrown in a server function, is it catchable on the client? Would be useful. We might have to add some serialization there. It might just work because we're already serializing errors. But you might not get the extends yeah. I don't know, complicated. We'll follow up on that. Execute the server function. If it's a response, just return it. If it's a valid element, this is where we detect RSCs. So if it's a valid element, we are rendering to pipeable stream. And this is where we're just going to do that all for you. So this is in the server handler. I feel like the rendering to pipeable stream. Oh no, we want that. We have to have that. So render to pipeable stream. And then and then we send the stream. Yep. This is just a fake out Vinci or fake out, this is just a fake out H3 and make sure that we can actually just stream it. I don't know exactly why. Otherwise, we're just returning a regular response. We're JSON stringifying the result and sending through type JSON. There's really not much else to it. There's the fetcher, the index, the rest of it. React server runtime. Oh yeah, this is just the function. We're just returning the identity of the function during the server on the server function runtime. So the configuration looks like this for Vinci. There is a public server. There's a client or a public router, a client router. There's an SSR router. There is the server router. So, and this one's a worker because it needs to be run in a separate environment for React server functions to work properly and a bunch of other things. And then they're just kind of linked between each other with all these plugins and runtimes. Just yawned, and I think that's the sign that it's time to wrap up this stream. There's only 16 people left. Wow, you guys are troopers. Do you guys have any questions, last minute questions before we sign off? I can take a couple more minutes and answers, any questions or random things that you want to talk about. We'll just wait for that streaming latency to get down to you before I can see the chat. Lithdu says, I wonder with server transform for Vinci, I wonder if there's a way to pass in custom options to the start handlers so that we can change JSON stringify parse with super JSON. I believe there is. There should be a way to pass in a custom serializer. I still got to figure it out though. It's going to be interesting. So it's kind of a middleware problem too. Yeah, I don't know. Great question. Something to look into. Second yawn. It's only 4:30, but I am tired. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I think I'm going to sign off. So appreciate everybody hanging out with me. Looks like everybody's 17 people are still here waiting to see if any other questions come in, but that's fine. Yeah, I really hope that this ends up in a good place. Like, dealing with all of this stuff is intimidating, and it's a lot of work, but it's going to be really cool. If I can just figure out how to ship this really these portable utilities and portable experience around React Server components, then hopefully I can hand it off to people who are really passionate about it, who can take it even further. We'll see where it goes. But thanks for hanging out with me, and we'll see you next time. See ya.